Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. Daniel here with another book review video. So today we are looking at Dark December, the full account of the Battle of the Bulge by Robert E. Merriam. So just to read from the blurb of this book, it starts off with a quote. It says, "This is undoubtedly the greatest American battle of the war, and will, I believe, be regarded as an ever-famous American victory. Winston Churchill." On the 16th of December 1944, the German army launched their last of their attacks against the Allied forces. With the American forces off guard, the German offensive surged through the Ardennes for a last-ditch attempt to win the war on the Western Front. Robert E. Merriam, a soldier who witnessed the battle, pieces together a step-by-step account of what occurred from the planning undertaken by the German High Command to the initial engagement and encirclement of the Allied troops, through to the counter-offensive that devastated the German forces. Merriam spent much time wandering through the front line to the Corps headquarters, listening, noting, and talking with the men who were attempting to stem the sudden German tide. These first-hand accounts, along with numerous battle records, form the basis of Merriam's fascinating work, Dark December. Dark December occupies a distinguished place among war books. Every paragraph is based upon evidence, not flimsy wartime rumours. Technical enough for the professional, accurate enough for the historian. In fact, it is the history of the best. It is lucid and understandable for the general reader. If the veterans of the Army's Historical Division can maintain Mr. Merriam's high standard of stimulating, critical and painstaking work, we will be fortunate. Dark December can be heartily recommended to anyone faintly interested in the war. The book explores a number of myths which have been winning their improper way into general belief. Dark December, the full account of the Battle of the Bulge, is essential reading for anyone interested in World War II, the most famous battle on the Western Front. And just to read about Robert E. Merriam, it also says, Robert E. Merriam was a captain in the United States Army from 1942 to 1964. Dark December, the full account of the Battle of the Bulge, was first published in 1947. He spent a number of years in politics, including 3 years as Deputy Assistant to the President under Dwight D. Eisenhower. He passed away in 1988. So this book is a reprint. It was published in 2017 by Amazon. It's one of those print-on-demand sort of books, which I have to admit I'm not a huge fan of. I do prefer when books are released by publishers as opposed to just a print-on-demand service. But it was originally written in 1947. The book itself is not particularly long. It is 201 pages. There's no bibliography or index, so it is pretty thin for 200 pages. It's paperback. I don't know if any other versions were printed in sort of hardback. The writing is fairly large, I have to admit. Very easy to read. So I've got a couple of points on this book. It's, first of all, it's 7 chapters, and each chapter is punctuated by sort of subheadings. So it breaks each chapter down into different segments, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. There's plenty of other books which do that. But other books don't really have headings from what I've noticed. Some do, some don't. Majority don't. They just sort of start off with a line break and then continue on. But, that's not a bad thing. So one thing I did pick up on reading this was that there's quite a few typos in there, which can make it a little bit difficult to read. I mean, there was one on the blurb here. the German army launched their last of their attacks. I mean, on the blurb that should have been picked up. In the text, I'm always unsure with the text. I mean, certainly it should have been picked up initially when the book was first published back in 1947. But with reprints, I like them to try and stay as loyal as possible to the original text. So I am glad in some respects that the typos weren't picked up, but at the same time, one would hope that someone would cast an eye over it and pick up on any errors and typos. For me, this book isn't the best on the Battle of the Bulge. I mean, it's 201 pages long, so it's not going to cover every aspect of the war. But I just find that there are other books which have been written, such as Battle of the Bulge by Patrick Delaforce, or Snow and Steel by Peter Caddick Adams, which are better. They're longer, they've got more detail, they seem to cover more. I mean, the first chapter in this book charts the planning of the German offensive through the Ardennes, beginning on 20th of July 1944 in the aftermath of the bomb incident. That was the bomb incident which led to the triggering of Operation Valkyrie, in which von Stauffenberg attempted to kill Hitler and round up the SS and Himmler and Goebbels and take control and end the war. So one thing I'm dubious of is that Merriam, while he worked for the Army Historical Division, and he says that he interviewed hundreds of German soldiers and commanding officers and read through all these documents, is that he quotes at length at times different conversations which were had in the German headquarters, which things like that I always find a little bit dubious and think should be taken with a pinch of salt, in as much as, you know, Merriam was an Allied soldier recounting a conversation held by the Germans. So Merriam wasn't there, so he's relying on the Germans recounting everything sort of verbatim. And in that I find difficulties in that, you know, I can't remember word for word conversations that I had yesterday or even earlier today, never mind what happened at the time of 18 months previous or 2 years previous. I mean, I think I'd probably be a bit more accepting of the conversation if this book had been written by a German who was there. So I've recently read The Story of the Prinz Eugen by Fritz Otto Busch, which is the story of the Prinz Eugen from sort of her commissioning right the way through to the end of the war. But 80% of the book focuses on Prinz Eugen in consort with the Bismarck in May 1941. And what Busch recounts are conversations that were had on board the bridge of the Prinz Eugen, held between the navigating officer, the first gunnery officer, the captain himself. So I'm a bit more accepting of that because Fritz Otto Busch was actually there. You know, if he didn't recount everything exactly word for word, you know, it was pretty much going to be there because, you know, he was there, he witnessed it all, and he's not sort of trying to be self-serving in that regard. Whereas this work, you know, I can't help but think that the Germans were potentially being, or any Germans who were interviewed, were potentially being somewhat self-serving, particularly those of higher rank. Because obviously we know in the immediate aftermath of the war, you know, a lot of German commanders were interrogated and evidence was presented at Nuremberg, and crimes and whatever else were investigated. So, you know, in some respects you've got to think that these conversations may have been self-serving of, oh well, this person said that, but it wasn't me, sort of thing. But yeah, I do take those conversations with a pinch of salt. Also, Merriam bases a lot of this book on official documentation, which is great. You know, documentation is a historian's best friend, but at the same time he doesn't actually quote any of it. He sort of uses that as the basis and writes a story around it. So for me, that means this book is somewhat flawed and a bit lacking. But what I do like is the fact that this work was published in 1947, which, you know, some people may think that's a strange thing, you know, as I've just mentioned, there's great works out there like Park Delforce's Battle of the Bulge and Peter Caddick Adams' Snow and Steel. But the reason I like this book, or think that it has a merit, is because it was published in 1947, which that was, well, the war ended in May 1945, the war in Europe. So that means that this book was written somewhere between 18 months and 2 years after the end of the war, which is great from the perspective of the historian, because the war was fairly fresh in the minds of those who Merriam contacted. So it's one thing I talk about in my own work is the fallibility of memory, and that's sort of the longer or the more time that passes, the less specific details become. So, you know, something that I did yesterday I can recount in great detail. If you ask me in a week's time about an event which occurred yesterday, I could probably give you the outline of it and give you a few details, but it's not going to be as clear cut as what it would be today. Ask me in a year's time about a particular event which happened yesterday, and, you know, I'm going to be a bit more wishy-washy in the details. Ask me in 5, 10, 15 years time. Again, that detail might be more, well, the detail will be generalised. You know, the finite details aren't going to be there, and I think that's one thing which lacks in some histories, is that finite detail, because obviously we're in the 21st century now. You know, a lot of those who participated in the events are passing. I know there is a drive, certainly in Britain, to try and capture the memories of those who served during the Second World War. I mean, I know hundreds of accounts have already been collected, not just in Britain through the Imperial War Museum, Sound Archives, but through other means across the globe. But I always think that it's a problem that we have in the historical field, is that no one sort of wants to talk about events in the immediate aftermath of the war. And then maybe 15, 20, 25 years later, people want to talk, then sort of attention drops away a bit, and then when we realise that there's a finite number of those who participated in these great events left, you know, then there's that big drive again to try and capture their accounts before everything's lost. So I think that's where modern historians are left flawed, because of that resource. But I think at the time, obviously, Merriam was able to interview a lot of these individuals, so he could get those details. The details of the events of the Battle of the Bulge were fairly fresh in the mind, which makes this a somewhat valuable work, because it can provide those nuances and little details that other works are perhaps lacking, and offers a different perspective, because as well, with it being written in 1947, it was probably something of a two-dimensional view. So as time goes on, more official documents are released, things are covered up in the aftermath of events, and, you know, 10-year, 20-year, 30-year secrecy imposed on them, so that, you know, documents which Merriam may not necessarily have had access to, you know, being released years later, which adds weight to other accounts and new details, and allows revisions to take place to provide more of a three-dimensional view. So in that respect, this work is fairly valuable. But I would say that's about it. It's a nice little overview. I wouldn't say it's a work that I would read if I want to get a full detailed view of the Battle of the Bulge. You know, it's one component of a wider study, I think is what it would be fair to classify this as. But they're just my thoughts. You know, if you've read this book, you know, let me know what your thoughts are in the comments below. If you've enjoyed this video, hit a like, make sure that you hit that subscribe button so that you don't miss any future updates, and we'll catch you next time. Thank you.